Hi everyone, this is Miss P and this is a review of comparing fractions. Now, there's lots of things to think about when we try to compare fractions, and there are a few different ways to approach the problem depending on some important things that we're going to look for here. So when you're comparing fractions, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the denominator. And we're going to check to see if the denominator is common between the two fractions that we are comparing. In the case where there is a common denominator, as there is in this example, see how the denominator of both of the fractions that we are comparing is 8. So since we have a common denominator, it's pretty easy. We're just going to compare the numerators. Because we have a common denominator, we know that the whole has been broken into the equal number of parts for both fractions. So in this case, the whole has been broken into 8 parts for either side of our comparing. So we know that 5 of those 8 parts is going to be greater than 3 of those 8 parts. So in this case, when there's a common denominator, we are going to compare the numerator. And we know that 3/8 is less than 5/8. Now, if there isn't a common denominator, we can actually check to see if there's a common numerator. For example, in this case, there's a common numerator. See how the numerator in both fractions is 1. That means both of the fractions we're working with in this case are unit fractions, but there's different denominators. Okay, so what we have to think about is each fraction represents that a whole has been broken up into a certain number of pieces. The first fraction shows that the whole has been broken up into 4 pieces, and the second fraction shows that the whole has been broken up into 5 pieces. Since we're working with a common numerator here, and in this case they're both unit fractions, so we're working with the numerator of 1 in both cases, we have to ask ourselves which piece is going to be bigger. If we have 2 wholes of the same size, and we break one into 4 parts and one into 5 parts, which one is going to have a bigger unit fraction, a greater number? So if we take 2 wholes of the same size and break one into 4 pieces and one into 5 pieces, the size of the pieces are going to be different. If we compare the unit fractions, we just have to imagine that we're taking 1 out of the 4 pieces in the first whole and 1 out of the 5 pieces in the second whole. So as you can see from these 2 visual examples, when you break a whole up into 4 parts, 1 piece of those 4 parts is bigger than if you broke the same whole up into 5 parts, and we're only representing 1 of those 5 parts. So in this case, when there's a common numerator, you can actually look to see how big the denominator is, because the more parts it's broken into, the smaller each part is. So in this case, when we're comparing 1/4 and 1/5, we're going to realize that 1/4 is actually greater than 1/5. Whenever you have a common numerator and the denominators differ, the fraction with the smaller denominator is actually going to be the greater number. The last situation that you might find yourself in is comparing 2 numbers where there is no common denominator or common numerator. That might look like this. In this case, we're comparing 3/4 to 5/8. You might notice that the denominators are different from each other, 4 and 8. And the numerators are different from each other, 3 and 5. In this case, we can compare these 2 numbers visually, or we can calculate equivalent fractions that share the same denominator. Now, in this case, we're going to first notice that the denominators in these 2 numbers, 4 and 8, are actually really good denominators to be working with, because in this case, 4 is a factor of 8. We know that 4 times 2 equals 8. So what we can do is we can convert the first fraction here to an equivalent fraction that shares a denominator with our second fraction. We can take 3/4 and we can find its equivalent fraction with a denominator of 8. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to determine how we can take a 4 and make it into an 8. And we know that 4 times 2 equals 8. And when we're converting a fraction into an equivalent fraction, we always have to do the same thing to the numerator as we've done to the denominator. Since we've multiplied the denominator times 2 in order to get our equivalent denominator, we're going to have to multiply the numerator times 2 in the same way. 3 times 2 equals 6. So what we've done is we've converted 3/4 into its equivalent 6/8. Now what we can do is compare the two fractions that share a common denominator. And if you remember, two fractions that share a common denominator can be compared by simply comparing the numerator and seeing which is bigger. So in this case, 6/8 is a bigger fraction than 5/8. Since 6/8 is an equivalent fraction to 3/4, I can go back to my original problem up here, and I can confidently say that 3/4 is greater than 5/8. Whenever you're comparing a fraction, you should ask yourself if there is a common denominator, if there is a common numerator, and if there is neither, you should try to find a way to make the two fractions that you are comparing share a denominator. If the two fractions are not easily compared in that one of the denominators is not a factor of the other one, there are many other ways to approach this that you can see in the next review video.